Welcome to the video lecture series, Culture, Worldview, and Origins. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist. In this series, the start of the series, we began with culture and how culture influences who we are, what we are. How the culture can bring factors into us that include how we think to what we think. And that is what the basis of looking at was culture. In this series, this next part, we've been looking at worldview. And how did worldview get into this? Well, let's take a look at first again at Stephen Jay Gould, whose quote is the kind of the guiding quote for this series. He says, "First, facts do not come to us as objective items seen in the same unambiguous way by all reasonable people. But," he says, "theory, habit, prejudice, and culture all influence the facts we choose to observe and the way in which we perceive them." I've been trying to identify what he meant, or what includes, how does culture come in and how does it influence? We've seen that going through the different cultural perspectives, or the 21 differences of between my students and myself in the teaching process, and how culture cultivates actually a way of thinking and what to thinking. And then we saw theory, and theory came in through worldview. And through that, theory is a way of viewing things through a grid. And that was introduced by Richard Dawkins, in that when he said that the Darwinian worldview or theory could in principle be the only one that solved the mystery of our existence, in that he brought in theory. Then we had prejudice. And prejudice was built into the first step of the Welt build, or building the picture. It was a prejudice, and didn't mean prejudice in a negative way, but prejudice mean prejudging, in that it was the setup. It was the rules. It was the principles. It was the tendencies. It was the framework to judge by. And so as we implement a framework to understand our world, we're judging the world. We are implementing a framework to understand it, and that is through the prejudice of the Weltbild, of the German concept of the three Welts. Then we had habit, and we haven't touched habit, and I should have, because habit is what we do as a automatic product of our theory and of our prejudices and of our culture. Habit is something that we do. We don't have to think about it. It's habit. And that is part of our model, our Welt model. And so habit would be a part of the Welt model. So what we do have is theory, habit, prejudice, and culture are all a part of the four factors that influence each one of us as we seek to understand our world and view our world. Just returning back to another quote of Richard Dawkins, putting into perspective this current series of worldview. He says, "I want to persuade the reader." Okay, so his motive is wanting to persuade. Not just that the Darwinian worldview happens to be true. Okay, so he wants to persuade us not specifically about science or about biology, but it's about a Darwinian worldview that he believes happens to be true, but that it is the only known theory that could in principle solve the mystery. And so he is the one that introduces the concept of worldview into science, and also the parallel concept of theory. And what we had seen heard in the previous lecture was that theory is a part of philosophy, and philosophy seems to be a way of expression a way of understanding, the way of building a grid of understanding the world from a Western perspective, where worldview is a way of building the same type of grid, the same type of viewing, of influencing, of viewing with an influence the world. And that's why the jagged lines is that we don't view things as they are. We don't have direct access to the objects that are in the world, but we are indirect through our own viewing lenses, glasses, which would be in the Welt model, it'd be the Weltbild, and then the Weltanschauung, and then it would be making a Welt model. So that is how this series that we're in right now introduced the concept of the worldview and theory and philosophy. So now we have, what I've put together is just a chart. For those that read words or that like in words, I made a chart. And I'm not making fun of anybody. I'm just saying that some of us like words and some of us do better with diagrams. And so here's a chart for those of us that like words. Here is the comparison. First row is the personal experiences and cultural experiences factored in. Okay, who factors that in? The Western concept of philosophy does not factor it. The non-Western concept of viewing the world factors it in, and it's called the Weltbild. Stephen Jay Gould factors it in, and he calls it culture. And so that is his number. First is culture. Okay, second row. Choice of source of reliable knowledge. Okay, you have to choose your source of reliable knowledge, and you're free to choose it. What do you choose? Is it human logic? Is it empiricism? Is it authority? Or is it intuition? So our choice of source of reliable knowledge. In philosophy, that's called epistemology, your epistemological source for knowledge. In the non-Western concept of the viewing of the world, again, it would be the Weltbild. It's still part of the Welt concept. And for Stephen Jay Gould, it's the prejudice. It's part of the building in of the prejudging of all the factors that come into, which include choosing of the reliable source. Row number 3. Okay, elaboration of basic beliefs on source, based on the source of reliable knowledge. Okay, what does that encompass? In the Western view of philosophy, it would be one, epistemology, because it still has to do with basic beliefs. It still has to do with source of knowledge. But it includes metaphysics, because metaphysics and ontology under metaphysics is about basic beliefs, about the basic beliefs of reality, about my being. Okay, so that is the two, how they correspond. Now, how do they correspond to worldview or to viewing concept? It's the Weltbild. It's still the Weltbild area, because we're not projecting out yet. We're still developing the inner picture. And so we're still in the Weltbild concept. And for Stephen Jay Gould, we're still in developing our prejudice basis. Okay, next one. The systematic structure developed for expressing our basic beliefs. Okay, our basic beliefs, how they're expressed, that would be in the Western concept of philosophy, that would be logic. That would be under the category of logic, and how it is logically expressed through the application and the guidelines of using the methods, the basic beliefs, and the source of knowledge. So that would be logic. That would correspond to number 2, which would be the Weltanschauung, which would be the worldview, because now we are taking our framework, our picture, and we're looking out at the world, at using that preformed prejudice, using Stephen Jay Gould's term. But so anyway, that's Welt and Tendencies. So Welt and Chung corresponds to logic, whereas in Stephen Jay Gould's framework, it would correspond to theory. Theory is looking out. Theory is spectator. Theory is taking all the principles and all the rules and all the guidelines and applying them in looking at the world, because theory means to look out. Theory means to apply already set principles and concepts and rules. So that line there, we have a systematic structure developed for expressing basic beliefs, is looking out at the world and interpreting the world. Through philosophy, it's logic. Through Welt concept, it's Welt and Chung. And through Stephen Jay Gould, it's theory. The last one, the model of world derived from the reasoning structure and basic beliefs. Okay, in philosophy, that would correspond to logic and axiology. Middle of the Welt concept, it'd be the Welt model. And to Stephen Jay Gould's, it would be his habit. The habit of looking at things in a certain way, of conserving and implementing the rules makes a model. So that would be the habit. That chart pretty much corresponds or shows the relationship now between worldview and between philosophy and between Stephen Jay Gould. You can't compare worldview to philosophy. They're two different levels of concepts. Philosophy being the general level of 4 subconcepts, and worldview being a subconcept of 3 Welt models or 3 Welt concepts. So you can't really compare directly philosophy with worldview, because they're not referring to the same level, not referring to the same category of what we're trying to explain. So now we're back to the house. We're back to the house concept. And again, I like the house. It's visual. It's something. We build houses, so it's a part of my history a little bit. It's not 1. It's 0 on the bottom is culture. It's grounded in culture, and that corresponds to Stephen Jay Gould's culture. That influences. Culture is the prejudice built in, the prejudice that is formed by the forces, invisible forces of my genetics, my surrounding culture, my upbringing, my environment. Everything is that culture. And then out of that tendency that's already formed, I choose a source of reliable knowledge. What do you choose? Is it intuition? Is it authoritative? Is it logic? Is it empirical knowledge? So you choose one of your sources. Then out of that source, you get your basic beliefs, which again corresponds to the prejudices. And those basic beliefs correspond to your source that you've chosen for reliable knowledge, which is based on the tendencies of my culture. Then we have the development of a system of thought, which could correspond to a philosophy, a type of philosophy, philosophical thought. And out of that, we have our methods of how to get to reliable knowledge. And that has to do with theory, because we take our methods and we look out. We look out upon the world around us, and we try to make sense of it through our theory, through our worldview. And then the system applied to practice, and that system should be consistent with the undergirding values, the undergirding rules, methods, beliefs, and culture. It should be coherent. We can't just grab something up here and think, wow, that's popular. That's really neat. Maybe I would like to grab that. You can't do that. we have to maintain consistency, and we have to maintain a habit that is consistent with the rest of the house. And that's why with the Origins Project, or the scientific models of origins, we have to choose a model that is consistent. That model has to be consistent with the rest of our house. And when we don't understand that, we choose a model that's inconsistent, and then what happens? Well, then we end up remodeling the house. And we end up changing the structure of the house because we chose a model that did not reflect the values, the rules, the habits, the basic beliefs of that house. So now what we're closing in on, and what we're going to go in from here, is looking at the different scientific models. And you look at them, I look at them, and you choose one. Not because you think it's good, not because you like the way whatever, but because it corresponds to your house structure. So now that is what we have. We are equipped now to look at different models and look at it through the culture, through our prejudice, through our theory, and through our habits. We're able to look at different authors. We're able to look at different models, different theories, and see whether or not does that fit into my house, or am I trying to fit something into my house that the foundation can't support. And that is where we're going to be going from here. So we're wrapping up on theory, prejudice, habit, and culture, and how those come together to form a force that will produce a model. And that's what we're going to be doing in the next phase of this video series. We're going to be taking what we've just gone over now and applying it to the different models of origins. That's why the name of the series, Culture, Worldview, and Origins. We've gone through over culture. We've seen how it can influence us and give us a base for thinking and acting and believing, and then viewing, the world viewing process, which has to do with theory too, then viewing, and then it all comes together to give us a model to go by. And now we're going to look at and evaluate the different models of origins through these factors. Again, thank you for accompanying me, and I hope that you can continue as we move on now to looking out, that would be worldview, looking out at different models and constructing maybe your personal one as to what corresponds really to your house rules. But thank you again. We're Tim and Holly Nyquist. If you'd like to correspond with us, we're at doubleroadrover.com or thn.academia@gmail.com. Thank you again. See you next time.